The Gospel of Gold by G.S. Lewis. Out of nowhere, Koga appeared in a crouch beside Price. He reached out and grasped him firmly by the arm.
"Come with me, now!"
he demanded.
"But what?"
asked Price, looking at him with a mix of bewilderment and pain as he was forcibly dragged away.
"Koga, where were you? What are you doing with him?"
asked Bruno, looking just as baffled.
"We need his ice types,"
Koga replied sharply.
"The Dragon Master is here. I'll navigate Price safely through the old ninja hideout. You stay here and take care of the boy."
"What ninja hideout?" Price asked with a confused whine, but Koga only hauled him away toward the closed convenience store. Presently, Gold found himself alone with Bruno. The Elite Four member turned his attention slowly back to his quarry. His eyes were alight with battle rage. Gold swallowed hard.
"Were you just serving as a distraction for Lance all this time?"
he asked, his voice low and deadly. I had no plan, stammered Gold truthfully. I rarely ever have a plan. Then a thought alighted on him, even in the midst of his fright. You're trying to fight Lance. You know of his business here, don't you? Bruno's eyes narrowed.
"Koga was wrong. We should have taken you from the first moment."
He pointed.
"Machamp! Sleeper hold!"
In the time it took Gold to blink, Machamp had already covered half the distance in a single lunge. There was no running from this thing. In another second, it would have him. There was a flash of orange, and Machamp tipped sideways mid-sprint, almost in slow motion. The next moment, Gold heard two explosive sounds, the sharp crack of a sonic boom, and the heavier smash of brick crumbling as Machamp was hurtled past him into the Poké-Center wall. Gold stumbled backward and away from the four-armed Pokémon that had charged him like a bull, and looked around wildly for whatever had disrupted him. A pressurized blast of wind rocked his balance and caused him to look up. A second later, he fought for balance again as the thing landed with an earth-shaking thud. A Dragonite! The Pokémon was 7 or 8 feet tall, stockily built, and orange-colored from the tip of its horn to the end of its tail. It resembled a bipedal dragon with surprisingly undersized wings, something that seemed incapable of proper flight, let alone sonic speed. Nevertheless, this was the creature that had knocked Machamp away from Gold just before the brute could grab him. It could only have been Lance, come to the rescue. Gold searched around expectantly, but he could not see the champion anywhere, nor had he heard his voice giving commands. He glanced back at Bruno, who stared at the newly come Dragonite with a Pokédex pointed its way.
"Level 40, that's strange,"
Gold heard him mutter. The Elite's voice sounded confused at first, but then his eyebrows raised and his expression shifted to one of understanding.
"But of course, the evolution signal wave. That may also explain why Crobat didn't detect it as a superpowered threat."
He looked up and smiled triumphantly.
"Get up, Machamp. This thing's not so tough. It's only a Dragonair in disguise."
The four-armed Pokémon lifted itself out of the small pile of debris it had made and brushed a bit off its shoulder with a defiant sneer. Gold noted that its other shoulder had sustained some deep scratches and bled freely, but the Machamp was putting on a show of toughness. Dragonite shifted its body into a pose that half-faced its opponent, wings outstretched, poised to charge. The two faced off for a moment, and then Bruno barked a command that set them headlong at each other. They clashed like a pair of freight trains, the noise of their bodies colliding as thunder. Dirt and clumps of grass were kicked up behind them as they strained and grunted and snarled. Gold watched in morbid fascination as Dragonite jabbed Machamp between the eyes with its blunt horn, only to be butted right back by the 3 sharp crests on Machamp's head. The muscular Pokémon followed with a cross-chop to both sides of Dragonite's neck, which issued a faint crunch and forced its opponent's posture down. Dragonite let out an agonized gurgle, which became abruptly more pronounced as Machamp's other 2 fists drove into its ribcage. This time, the crack of breaking bone was so loud that Gold cringed involuntarily. Yet, even with the massive damage it had sustained, Dragonite responded with the inner focus native to its kind. The pained exhale turned into a breath of emerald flames, which enveloped Machamp's head and forced it to retreat painfully back, with arms over its injured face. Dragonite instantly went on the offensive, beating off Machamp's lower arms with its scaly wings, then twisting in a circle sweep with its tail, knocking the enemy to the ground. Machamp was only down for a split second before rolling backwards and rising to its feet again, its mouth bubbling with saliva. The 2 of them charged once more, and the struggle began anew. So, this is what a battle looks like between elite-level Pokémon, thought Gold, watching the 2 opponents continue to savage each other without pause. In spite of his horror, he couldn't help faintly admiring the spirit of both Pokémon, the unyielding determination to stand as the lone victor. But as bones continued to break and the injuries gaped wider, he knew with perfect clarity what the outcome would yield at this level. 2 roughhousing schoolboys might leave some lingering bruises upon each other at the worst. These, however, were like grown men fighting to kill, for their resolve to win would not allow them to faint, except at the verge of death. For them, it did not matter if the reward for victory was a neighboring country or a piece of candy. All that mattered was possessing the superior power. I can stop this, he realized suddenly, as Machamp swept a leg heavily across Dragonite's face. Some things may be worth dying for, but this is all just so the Elite Four can have me. This isn't worth a Pokemon's life. Bruno! He cried urgently, turning back to the fighting elite. Call this off! I'll come quietly! Bruno? For the last minute or so, Bruno had ceased calling commands to his Machamp. Gold looked closer and saw that his hand was pressed to his ear, and his eyes focused on nothing in particular, as he seemed to be arguing with someone Gold couldn't see. Is he on a phone?
I know I keep saying it, but it's all I need! Just a few more seconds!
Bruno shouted insistently.
No, I have him! We would have had him from the start if we'd stuck together! Just a few more seconds!
After another moment's pause, Bruno cursed loudly and pulled out a Pokeball. Hope flared up in Gold, and he expected a red light to shoot out of the ball and reclaim Machamp. Instead, Bruno threw the ball, and a second burst of light energy issued from it. The light stretched and widened until it faded into the form of a monstrous onyx. This one easily matched the size of the Steelix from Union Cave, and despite being only the 3rd one Gold had ever seen in his life, it proved the biggest.
It is against my code to go 2 against 1,
Bruno said sternly, addressing the stone snake.
But should Machamp fall, you must finish the task. Victory is near. I will return expecting it.
The serpent's great head rose and fell in affirmation. Bruno nodded back, then raced off toward the store with the Gyarados poster.